To it. Tonight we're going to dive a little bit deeper with two great plant care and plant design experts, both of them coming with a great deal of information. So we're really pleased to have Sean Roulan and Russ Welser with us tonight. I am Jennifer Grant. I am the chair of the Town Sustainability Committee, and Jacob Fox, who is the Climate Smart coordinator for I think that's your title, right, Jacob, for the town of Geneva?
Yes, that's right.
So we're both hosting, and if we can help with any questions, we will chime in as well. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it to Jacob to introduce Sean, who's going to be speaking first.
Thanks, Jen. I apologize for my video not working, but I'm just going to do this. So it's my honor to introduce Roulan. I really, can you hear me?
Yeah, but it's a bit wonky.
Hello?
We can hear you, Jacob. It was just kind of stringing out a little bit, though.
Can you hear me clean now?
No.
Sean, Sean, I think what we're going to do is we're going to leap over.
That was a great introduction, Jacob. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So I'm sure you can do it the best yourself, Jacob. So, excuse me, Sean. So would you please just jump in and introduce yourself and then go ahead?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Jacob, thank you so much for the introduction. It's an honor. it's an honor to be here. You know, talking about, I think, that one thing that we all share, which is a love for the lake. And, you know, by default, I think that is a way of interacting with nature and seeing that we interact with nature. So I went to school for ecological landscape design, you know, back in 2007. And for about, I don't know, how many years has it been since then? Like 13 years I've worked in the realm of landscape design and build, you know, for people that would like to develop gardens on their properties, and even, you know, community groups and that sort of thing. Really just looking at that intersection of how humans interact with the earth. So I can share some, and I can start the presentation whenever we're ready. And I'm just going to paint some broad strokes of what I've seen over the years in terms of and it's not an exhaustive list. You know, it will always be biased by the sorts of things that I like to see myself, you know, in a landscape and in my natural environment. And for me, the goal is always, in a way, helping the nature around us be a bit healthier, because I think that contributes to a lot of good things that we could all agree, you know, we want a clean lake. So I can start screen sharing whenever.
Yep, you should be able to do that.
Okay.
You're up and
does that work?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. I haven't done a PowerPoint in 15 years. I shouldn't have told anyone that, but there we go. So ecological landscape design, I mean, in a jiffy or in a snippet, it's just recognizing that we do live in an ecosystem. Seneca Lake is a big part of that. And, you know, ecology is naturally beautiful. So this is a, you know, pretty picture of a garden that I had the opportunity to work with a client. This was in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And I'll show a little bit of the process here, but the existing condition was basically that there was a lot of lawn, and this was a slope, so there was a lot of water moving off the driveway and off the house. So this is kind of, you know, I'm starting with the pretty picture, right? And we'll go through the process a little bit more. But here in the Finger Lakes, we know, you know, we have Seneca Lake. This is a view from Sampson, kind of looking back towards Geneva. And, you know, every square foot of property, you know, where we live, where we recreate, all of it is the, you know, the watershed of Seneca Lake. So, you know, I know we've talked a lot about, you know, different pesticides and different things that are sprayed on the earth. I would move this talk a little bit more into the realm of, you know, how we care for our landscape contributes to how much water reaches the lake and what that water carries once it gets there. So there's something called non-point source runoff and point source runoff. So something, especially in a residential property, we know if our driveway catches a certain amount of rain, that water typically is going to convey to the street where it goes into a pipe and it goes to the lake. So the thought here is that humans can work with the water that falls on the earth where they live in a positive or a negative way. And I'd like to present some ways that we could do it in a positive way. So most residential properties in the area are really covered in lawn, covered in impervious surface. The house would also be an impervious surface. And the idea here, as I've learned it, is that we can learn from nature in the way nature creates healthy systems and implement those, not necessarily in a wild way, but in a way where, we're aiding nature in the process of, is nature is always coming up with ways to make our lake cleaner. That's just kind of what it does. And this is just a view of that garden you just saw very early on in the process. And we saw that, we needed to create a place for water to go, and we had a lot of lawn. So you can kind of see these faint orange lines in the bottom right of the screen. That was where I'd worked with the client to delineate areas where we would make a rain garden. There's areas where we would stop mowing, and there's also areas where we would actually plant an array of native plants and pollinator plants. And in the distance in this forest, just because this part of Massachusetts is a very healthy place, you can see that the edge of the forest here naturally tapers down. So it goes from being hemlocks, there's some sassafras in there, there's some white birch. So the forest naturally tapers down into a lawn. So that's a good concept to think about with residential properties. So one concept I learned a lot over the years, and especially in school, is that all land desires to become a natural, healthy forest. If humans left the equation, this is a photo of Seneca Lake with some oak trees holding the bank, and those trees have been allowed to grow and they serve a big function. So, one good thing that we can always do is plant trees because they do soak up water and they do prevent erosion. So when we think about creating ecosystem, and I talked about this earlier, you can delineate land care zones. There's different methods, and the goals with this project, we were delineating this thing called a rain garden, where the word rain garden is. And a rain garden is, it's not a pond, it's an area that you can direct a certain amount of water that comes from downspouts, or maybe it comes off a driveway. And it's very simple to create the calculations to see how big of a rain garden you need. Typically, you would divide your square footage by 6, assuming that your rain garden would be about 6 inches deep. So that would dictate that in a 1-inch rainfall, that rain garden could catch a significant amount of that water that would flow down. There's 3 rules of thumb with managing water in a landscape. There's the 3 S's. You want to slow that water down, you want to spread it out to as many places as you can, and you want to sink it into the soil, because the soil is really designed to absorb runoff, toxins, and the water will get to the lake eventually, but a lot of times nature creates patterns where it can catch that. So this is that same spot post-planting. You can see above the rocks, that is a rain garden and we did this really nicely with stones, but really it's just a bed that you would dig out 6 inches deep. Different things, there's a lot of great info online about rain gardens when you want to get into the technical aspects of it, but typically you want it at least 10 feet away from the house. You don't want it on the septic, and you want to make sure it's in an area that will perk. So basically, if you dug a hole in that area and filled it with water, it should drain out within a day, or else that garden's it's going to hold water for too long. So we don't want a pond where mosquitoes are going to breed and all that sort of stuff, but we do want to let that water stay on our property because it will minimize irrigation needs, it will grow various plants, and it makes the lake healthier. So this is a post view of that exact garden. The client's goals were to create native pollinator garden, but there's also some annual calendulas and stuff in the front. The red plant, that's growing in the center of the deepest part of the rain garden, along with some elderberries. And this might be more wild of an aesthetic than a lot of people want, but the concept is the same, where you're creating an area away from the house where water can stop and sink in before it goes on its way. on this project, you can't see it, but water from the drain pipes is actually going into a kind of a dry riverbed that brings it into that garden. And there is a second rain garden below it to catch extreme rain events if there's overflow. So every rain garden that you site, and I know we've talked about rain barrels, I think, in the past, you could set a rain barrel up on your gutter and it would overflow into a rain garden, because essentially most rain barrels aren't big enough to catch 1 inch of rain off most roofs. And then with broad strokes, other ways to treat the landscape. This is the rain garden catching 1 inch of summer rain, and this is well before the plants were established, and you can see how it's actually overflowed a little bit there. This rain garden was slightly undersized for the site because it was a lot of driveway to contend with. But especially in Geneva, most people have smaller properties, and it's a nice way to really, you can get rid of some lawn and you can make a nice garden that essentially is lower maintenance. Another idea here is low mow meadows. You can take parts of your property and seed them to wildflowers. Especially it's better if you have exposed ground for establishing meadow. But even for the average homeowner, just minimizing mowing will allow a lot of nice flowers to grow. And most people do appreciate those. And you can just weed whack them down in the fall or ideally in the spring. Other ideas for home landscapes, we talked about pollinator gardens. There's a million different names for the same garden. If I'm talking with, because I do landscape consulting and design every day, with some clients, I'm talking about beautiful flowering perennial gardens. With other people, I'm talking about that same exact garden, but we're calling it a pollinator garden. So it's one of those win-wins where gardens are beautiful and enjoyable for people to look at, but they're also good for nature, and long-term they are lower maintenance than a lawn. So there's another view, same garden, pollinator garden, very low maintenance once established. Other thoughts, this is a different project we did through, I work as a designer for a company called Thrive Landscape Design also. We do a lot of work in the Philly region. This was a forest that was overrun with non-native plants, crazy vines, tons of poison ivy. But a stream goes through here, which is part of the watershed of the Schuylkill River. So we came in with heavy machinery, a lot of work, cleared almost everything out except for the walnut tree you can see there in the center. And then that far bank was heavily mulched. And I can't stress enough, when we're talking about whether it's a rain garden or gardens on the property that minimize lawn and create habitat, that you find the right plant for the right place. That's what consulting with a professional can help you know, that this is a good place for a maple tree, or this is a good place for some shrubs or some perennials. So that whole bank has been basically planted to eventual forests. So oak trees, there's pawpaw trees, lots of different array, lots of magnolias. What would grow in a healthy ecosystem of the client's design. In the center of this, you can see there's and it's hard to see actually, but there's mown pathways. So one concern a lot of people have is ticks. And, I've had Lyme disease, so I also am wary of ticks. And that led me to understand where do ticks live. And they typically don't live in mown lawn. They would grow in meadow. So it's good to have good delineation on your property between mown areas and areas that are let to go a little bit more wild. But ticks rarely climb up onto humans from the grass. They're usually, kind of latch onto humans that brush against vegetation that's about knee height. So that's just one thought. Ticks are terrifying. Lyme disease is terrifying. I can tell you from firsthand experience. But on the top part of this, or on the bottom part of this photo, you can see there's a well-maintained lawn edge. And that whole meadow had well-maintained pathways. And personally, I was the main horticulturalist on this project, and I didn't have ticks on me, I don't think ever. And I was exactly in the environment where you would expect them to be. So ecological restoration, whether it's on a bigger scale or a small scale, we can guide and help nature through this natural process, which is becoming forest. And the natural tendency is the natural process would go to grasslands that could become trees and shrubs, which would eventually become a forest. And, whether we're talking about enjoyment of our properties, or climate change, or the health of the lake. Developing healthy habitat of annuals, perennials, trees, shrubs, habitat does help sink water, clean it, and create habitat, which is good for humans. So other thoughts, this is a persimmon tree. This is my favorite fruit tree. It's a native fruit tree that produces and just an incredible fruit. So that could grow here. When I'm talking about helping people establish trees on their properties, that's, fruit trees are very easy to do, especially if you mulch them well. They become very low maintenance systems. Edible landscaping, the Victory Garden movement is luckily getting a good resurgence. So even on a pool fence, you can grow some green beans, which I did with this client. This is that slope we looked at on the restoration project. That's a pawpaw tree. There's a holly tree to the left of it. And in this year one, we're growing winter squash. So there's a lot of different exciting ways to interact with your landscape. And then there's the last slide. This is a community garden that I helped build. And this is year one. So really, I like the idea that people are thinking about what they can do in their home landscapes. And I'm done.
Sean, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we're going to save most of the questions till the end, but maybe while we're making a switch, Pat had typed in a couple of different things that we might just address before we switch speakers. She said, regarding rain barrels, I need to find a way to seal the hose into the overflow hole. The way it is now, the water just flows out the hole without going into the tubing. Any comments?
I'm definitely not a rain barrel expert. I think rain barrels are nice. I think cisterns are better because they capture more water. That technology is beyond me.
Okay. We'll put that one off for a bit. And I guess I don't want to lose this, so I'm just going to mention it while I'm seeing it. The other part of what Pat had to say is that the city of Geneva apparently precludes people from letting, there's an ordinance to not allow grass to grow over 6 inches. Can anybody verify that, or have you folks on the city green committee had to deal with that or talked about that? Okay. All right. We'll put a little bookmark in that for the future.
I've heard that in my work with people with gardens around town. I think it's one of those things that doesn't seem to be enforced, but it would be great to get different regulations in place so people are comfortable with that. Because siting rain gardens on people's properties would involve potentially reducing like up to 50% of their lawn. And I'm in no way anti-lawn, but I think less lawn creates more enjoyable lawn. And when it's framed with gardens, people tend to enjoy being in their lawn more.
Right. Good points. Well, this is great, and a lot of beautiful pictures there, Sean. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We are going to switch speakers, and just to fill people in again, we are going to do that, and then we'll just let the questions flow. The next speaker has an absolute wealth of experience. I've known him almost since I started at Cornell. Russ Welser is the Cooperative Extension Educator for Ontario County, who just is so super knowledgeable about all kinds of plant care, whether it's a garden or a lawn or whatever. So he's going to take things a bit further from where Sean just left off, and maybe we'll see if we can stump Russ afterwards. If we can ask you a question, Russ, that you don't actually know the answer to, we'll see if we can get to that. And I will get back to when we finish Russ's part 2 is in some of the advertising. There's going to be yet another webinar tomorrow if you are really into this, and if you want to know more about lawns, especially that you don't hear about tonight. Tomorrow's webinar that Frank Rossi is giving is very going to be very lawn focused, is what I assume. So it was in our advertising, and I'll drop the link for that into the chat box too, if anybody's interested in that. But as I say, Russ, we're happy to have you here tonight too, and your wealth of experience, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. Sarah Meyer answered the question about the rain barrel and the leakage part. So if you didn't see that, it was in the chat, folks, so go check it out. for me, yes, I've been in this system for 41 years, and lawns have always been a part of that educational experience. And at the same time, it's also one that's been frustrating because in offering programs or classes, frequently they got canceled because of low impact and interest. That's changing a little bit just because of the interest in the lakes. And when it comes to lawns, I often find that folks still do things the old-fashioned way. So winter's been here and we're all been really holed up in the house, and we see these ads on TV to get out there and, fertilize and put on crabgrass killer and let's go to it. And at the same time, I see folks out there just rolling away the lawns, sometimes even with a quarter-ton pavement roller. These things are not necessary and can be very bad for your lawn as well. So here's the real simple portion of this for me, and that is for home lawns. For most home lawns, they would only need to be fertilized once a year, with 1 pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn area. And you're going to do this in late August, early September. And if you have a bluegrass lawn and you do some irrigation, I'm going to tell you to put on a second application, and that application is going to be in late May. So if you want to think about fertilizing a lawn, think about it in terms of holidays. Memorial Day and Labor Day, you're staying home and fertilizing your lawn. Now, the other thing we always run into is the big discussion about fertilizers. And, well, I don't want to use that chemical fertilizers. And that's okay. But if you're using any of those animal-based composts, you probably are creating a greater problem than if you were to use one of the synthetic fertilizers with low or no phosphorus in it. Because many of those animal compost type products and compost in general will have a great deal of phosphorus and potassium within them, as well as having some nitrogen. And folks, the way that these nutrients are getting to the lake is through soil erosion. So it's where you have bare areas in that lawn, that's where you're getting the movement of those nutrients with the soil headed to the lake. Yes, for nitrogen, it's more water soluble, so it'll move down through the soil profile, along with the water. But the grasses really need a fair amount of nitrogen. So, as I said, fertilizing once a year will be beneficial. As far as trying to put down any sort of fungicide to control lawn diseases, totally useless in a home lawn situation. No need to do that. If you're one of those that's always dumping on something for crabgrass control, you really need to figure out where and why you keep getting the crabgrass. The crabgrass is just an annual. It dies out and regrows in the spring and germinates anytime during the growing season. So if it's always pops up along the driveway, excuse me, or the sidewalk, until you improve that, you're never going to get regular grass to grow, and you're always going to have some crabgrass there. So quit putting on your crabgrass killer stuff. The other thing too is the height that you mow your lawn. If you're mowing your lawn at 2 inches or less, I'll guarantee you're going to have a lot more weeds such as dandelions and plantain, as well as your crabgrass, than if you were to mow it up there at the 3 and 3.5 inches. 3 is my minimum that I want to see. I would like to see you push it all the way up almost to 4 inches. The taller that grass is, the better the root system it's going to have, and the more it's able to smother out any of those germinating weed grasses and seeds below, such as the crabgrass. So that's the other aspect. 2, don't bother breaking up those clippings. They're going to decompose and they're going to add nitrogen back into that soil complex and reduce the amount of fertilizer that you would need to apply for your lawn. Yes, if grass gets way ahead of you and it starts to clump up, you could go in and rake it out of there. I tell everyone just simply get back onto that lawnmower a day or so after and just remow it and redistribute that heavy grass around. Same way with the leaves in the fall of the year. There's no real need to remove them. Just get on your lawnmower or your mulching mower and just grind them up, mow them up, and leave them in place. I'm sorry, yes, it may look a little ugly, but it's fine and dandy. The main thing is we don't want to have bare areas in this lawn, because that's what's the big contributor to the nutrients and for chemicals to be headed, to the waterways. So, is there a miracle cure for controlling weeds? And the answer is no. We can't go in there in a weedy lawn and just do some cultural practices to eliminate the weeds. What we need to do is have a good established lawn with few or no weeds, and then culturally maintain it by proper fertilization, mowing, watering, those sorts of things. So if you've got a lot of broadleaf weeds right now, plantain, dandelion, things of that nature, now is not the time to be trying to apply a broadleaf weed killer. Although that's what most of the lawn care companies are going to do for you. The best time to controlling those common broadleaf weeds is going to be in late September and into early October. The second best time is going to be when the dandelion flowers are full bloom, and actually better yet, if the seeds are flying in the air. So that's, yes, there are some other weeds that we have some special needs for, ground ivy being one of them, often referred to as creeping Charlie. Once again, a fall application of the appropriate herbicide would take care of it. The next best opportunity to get it under control is when it's in bloom. And that's going to be usually in May, but it's been cold, so it's not yet really flowering much. So even though, we're looking to prevent things going to the lake, we first have to get this lawn into a good shape so it will prevent things going to the lake. Unless you want to sit out there with your garden tool and dig every dandelion and pull every weed out for yourself and then go in and do an overseeding of the lawn, that's the only way you're going to be able to do it without some of these other chemical opportunities that you have in your bag of tricks to use here. So don't overlook them initially to get yourself into the position of being able to then culturally take care of things, so you do have fewer things headed to the lake. Trying to think of some other tips that I could give you for the lawn. I'm sure many of you are going to have some questions for me, and that's great. I'm usually better at answering the questions one by one than trying to give you a formal dissertation here. So Jennifer, I'm would turn this over and turn it over now to some question and answer type things, if you don't mind.
Okay, that sounds great, Russ. So We are in webinar mode, so if you raise your hand, there's like a little thing for raising your hand. That lets us know that you want to speak, or you can type into the chat box questions for anybody. And while people are thinking, there was a little bit more traffic about the rain barrels. Sarah Meyer put up some nice information, a little video clip for people who want to know more about working that overflow hole and rain barrels. And then Jacob, was there some other information that's been added?
On the rain barrels?
I don't know if you're able to monitor the chat box as well.
Yeah, I just see the rain barrel stuff, and then I wanted to ask a question about riparian buffers.
Okay.
And how to integrate them into your lawn, or how to encourage our communities to put more riparian buffers in.
That's something that I know Seneca Lake Pure Waters has been focused a lot with, especially in the vineyards and the farmed landscapes. And that's, it's two things. I mean, we know that water is flowing towards the lake, and I just read a thing earlier today that a lawn would absorb about 30% of the water that a garden bed, or specifically a rain garden, could absorb in a rainfall. So we know that lawns they can be great, but too much of them is going to put a lot of water into these riparian zones. So like in the city of Geneva, Castle Creek would be a stream. And there is plantings around it, but a riparian buffer would basically be preventing the erosion that Russ was talking about, by planting things that are appropriate for the site, that could create, minimizing the soil going to the lake. And one thought I had about this talk, I was asking one of my mentors in gardening what she would talk about, and she would just talk about really like this shared love that we all have for the lake, and also, in a lot of ways, a shared love of nature, and birds and butterflies, and bald eagles and all this stuff. And, having riparian buffers and plantings where water's moving, and also connecting those areas creates good habitat for the birds and their migrations and that sort of stuff.
Jennifer, I see we have a question regarding the height of the mowing lawn and whether or not it creates a better habitat for ticks. And again, it's going to depend on what tick you're talking about, folks. So with our common tick being the black-legged tick, also known as the deer tick, they like to stay where it's cooler and moister. So they were more inclined to stay more in the shady areas. So if you have a full sun lawn, they're less likely to be out there. But at the same time, if you're in an area where you have deer that's just traveling through your property on a daily, on their daily route back and forth all the time, you have potential of ticks dropping off from them every day into your lawn area. So in some regards, I've told some folks that they ought to consider fencing their property to keep the deer out just because of that and their concern. With the Lone Star tick, this tick is not too common right now here in the Finger Lakes, but it is definitely going to be with us, I think, within probably 5 or so years. It's already moved up the Hudson Valley. This particular tick also spreads a number of diseases, and it will survive out in that hotter, sunnier area. So the fact that we go from, say, 3 inches to 4 inches in mowing that height, is it really going to make a better environment for the ticks? Not really.
Right. Thanks, Russ. And I think that as far as tick management too, just to take that a little bit further, is thinking about, and Sean kicked it off with thinking really about how it is you use your yard and your property. So the places where you really are going to let higher plants grow up higher and have pollinator gardeners and perhaps overhanging grasses and whatnot, is not, you don't want that right next to your walking path or right where your kids are playing. But if you can do a bit of separation so that, like where kids play is one area, and some of these other areas that are more conducive to tick habitat are a bit away from the main living area of your lawn. You can be thoughtful about that in making the design of the property.
Folks, the other thing you got to start thinking about regarding these ticks is just like when you think about going out in the sun and putting on a sunscreen, you're going to need to start putting on, you know, some sort of DEET or some other product to deter them, or putting on, instead of shorts, long pants, and some of those aspects in dealing with them. You know, if it gets really bad, and again, all you got to do is talk to some of these individuals. Sean says he's been affected by it. It's not a nice thing, especially if it's gone undetected and they have these medical problems that they have for life. And so they'll be the first ones to tell you that I'm sorry, if I could have either, you know, put something on to protect myself, or even if I had to go and treat my lawn once or twice a year to reduce the incidence of them, boy, I would really have loved to have done that. So there are some key times in the season when if you're looking to make a insecticide application that is better. One is going to be probably in the June time period, and the other one is going to be in October.
Well, and we certainly don't want to forget inspection. Self-inspection, we talked about that a little bit in the last webinar. And when things open up a little bit too, we do have kit ticks for removing ticks and better information about ticks available through the New York State IPM program that we'd be happy to share with people, or you can go to the Don't Get Ticked New York website for a lot of that information in the meantime. So that's great. Sarah Meyer, I elevated you that you can speak. You were making some comments, and I thought it would just be easiest maybe if you spoke. You were making a couple of more comments about rain gardens.
Yeah, I believe it was Pat that asked the question, and I have a feeling she might have purchased a rain barrel from me via the Finger Lakes Institute in years past. So I'm just simply forwarding those resources that I created back in the day in hopes that people can continue to use them as guides. The overflow it's adaptable. There is not one way to really set up the overflow, other than you don't want it just flowing down the side of the barrel adjacent to your foundation. So you want to direct it away. And the resources I linked are how to do that. Whether using like a PVC elbow with an extension pipe to carry it away, or to purchase an adapter for your garden hose to put it away, direct it away from your foundation. So I hope those resources are helpful. I have some rain barrel experience. I've made them as workshops and have sold them via the Finger Lakes Institute in years past. So if I can be helpful further than those resources I linked, I'll try.
Great, thanks. Somebody else I wanted to put on the spot, Frank All, I'm going to allow you to talk, and then I'll tell you why. At the last webinar, you had asked a question, I can't remember exactly what it was, about property slope and whatnot. And I thought that Sean touched on that, and if you're able to reiterate that question, we could perhaps have Sean give us a few pointers about that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay. The reason I asked the question is because my property on Seneca Lake is flat. There is no slope. So it's not a concern for me specifically, but there are some properties along the lake that are basically flat, but then they have a slope down into the lake. I happen to have a seawall that eliminates that slope, so erosion is not a problem. And I was just interested to see if there were some comments about good ground covers to use on lake slope that's right there running right into the lake, because I like to put some fertilizer on my lawn, just so you know, Russ, but I don't do it 4 times a year, but I probably do it 3 times instead of just once. And I think that's probably a case of at the point which you put fertilizer down, if you get a good heavy rainfall within a matter of hours after you put fertilizer down and you have a slope going into the lake, you probably do have some fertilizer runoff right into the lake when that happens. But there may be some things that you could do with a small slope in front of the lakefront that would allow planting of something that would prevent that kind of erosion from occurring.
Can I take this one?
That's why I spoke about it. I
Yeah,
hope you
great.
would, Sean.
That's a great it's a great question. You know, I've always tried to look at what nature's doing that seems to be working. And I spend a lot of time on the edge of the lake. You know, there's a lot of different spots. Like if you're over near high banks, you know, that's probably the most erodible slope. It's like a 90-degree slope. You know, what you see on that edge are probably my two favorite trees. There's oaks, mostly white and red oaks, and black locust. I really love both of those trees. They, you know, on all those areas, they tend to hold that slope really well.
Yeah.
Over near Sampson as well, you see a lot of those oaks on the edge of the cliffs. There's other species like the red twig dogwoods and even sassafras in some places. So there are a lot of native woody plants that can hold slopes really well. You know, this might be a little bit of a controversial point, but we're all contending with Canada geese. Every person I know on the lake has a lot of geese.
Yes.
It said that you allow areas, you know, I think it's like up to a 10-foot buffer between the lake edge and mown lawn. They don't want the grass being taller.
Yeah.
But you would always like, you know, my vision, because I like natural landscaping to be beautiful. So you could have a beautiful stone pathway or a mown pathway that gets you to the lake. But if you have a planting buffer there, that can really help. You know, you could have even like, there's a sumac called Grow Low, which is one of the best erosion control plants. So it's like a 1 foot tall spreading, not a poisonous plant. It's just a native sumac, beautiful fall color. And it, you know, prevents erosion, it holds habitat, it's beautiful. You could do the same thing with like, even like cranberries or low bush blueberries. They don't love the soil here. But there's a lot of plants like summer sweet and native, you know, native types of hydrangeas, a lot of plants that can grow on the edge. You know, we could landscape our lake edge, you know, and, you know, dictate where do we walk there, you know. And on the topic of ticks, like I love up to like a 4 foot wide path at least. So like near a mown area or near a wild area, you have a wide pathway. And everybody knows, like, we're not going to brush up against this, but we're going to love it, you know, because, I mean, maybe I'm weird, but I love fireflies. And you do not usually see fireflies come out of a mown lawn, especially if there's been pesticides. But you will see the fireflies come out of a meadow. And, you know, they're losing habitat. So that's one thing. You know, woody shrubs and trees can do a lot of benefit, too, if they get established in the right way. But it's always site specific, you know. But that's my thoughts on that, I guess.
Frank, let me give you my 2 cents. Even though you know, trees and shrubs will sit there and hold the ground once they get established, there also is a lot of bare ground area in between all of these earlier on, and even later, it's a bare ground area. So you're much better, and not only that, but many of them are going to block your view. And boy, I tell you, those lakeshore owners just scream bloody murder if you block their view. And so what Sean was saying earlier about having that 5 foot, 10 foot tall grass buffer, you know, and a thick grass buffer will work tremendously well for you, as long as this isn't a super steep slope on you. So that would be my sort of recommendation. And then this is an area that you would have to go in and potentially mow down a couple of times a year and let regrow up. Otherwise, you're just going to create this potential fire hazard when all that material dies off and dries. Or it may become an area where you get a lot of metal voles that then are going to move into your landscape plantings and chomp and chew away during the fall and winter months and take out all those plantings that Sean just put in for you.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I love your comments, and I absolutely agree with both of you with what you've said. My follow-up to all of this is that the question was not so much for myself, but for people that are really having erosion into the lake. And it strikes me that there's a real educational opportunity here to get this information to people that either don't care about this or don't think about it as a problem in front of their lake property. And it's there, it's very real.
Frank, I appreciate you bringing this point up, and you know, it's very prescient right now at this point. And we actually, in our last webinar, we talked a little bit about the Castle Creek watershed. And you know, while that's not lakefront, that's also an eroding.
Hi, this is Sarah.
Watershed. Yeah. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, good. Thanks for calling me. I really appreciate you helping me navigate this. Was Rebecca able to make contact with you, or did she just give you my number?
Oh, I think Sarah.
Okay.
What was that?
I'm being eliminated from my position. And so I know that it's coming. The last day of the
Sarah, and you can mute her.
I'm trying to
So,
mute her.
There we go.
All right.
Oh, goodness. Sorry.
Yeah.
She didn't know her mic was on.
Never mind.
That was
Yeah,
a good thing you were saying, though, Jacob. You know, like when there's erosion on the lake, something's happening upstream. You know, and I see that a lot of the watershed, especially over near Kashong Creek, where a lot of the fields have been tiled. All that water goes directly to the stream, and it is eroding. You know, a lot of areas. Within restoration work, there's a lot of work in high erosion situations. With like there's biodegradable netting that can go down on steep slopes, and there's some super plants, you know, that can really get established quickly to retain slopes. But that's really the only, you know, that's all you can do is try and stop that. There's a lot of techniques for that, especially with this product called Core. You can get rolled up core tubes, you can get core fabric. You can plant directly into that, specifically with live stakes and other things that just grow incredibly quick. And I'm sure Russ could know some good grasses to throw in that mix. But that's what most of the professionals are doing now. Even some hydro seeding actually with native grasses sometimes is done.
Jacob, if you've got a fairly large scale thing that you're looking to do in terms of stream bank stabilization or any of those things, get a hold of the Ontario County Soil and Water Conservation folks. That's their expertise, and they do those sorts of things all the time. So there's your real experts for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we're going to talk about future webinars, and I'm thinking, you know, that you know, erosion, both stream bank and shoreline, and getting, you know, the soil and water folks could be a topic of a future webinar.
So Jacob, I see you put a chat note over here, something about what the biggest blind spots are in yard care. What are you referring to in terms of blind spots?
What are things, you know, I mean, you talk a lot about, you know, mowing heights. What are things that, you know, people do, you know, for cultural reasons, you know, or some reason that you think, you know, they're really missing the point on, you know, as far as yard care? And what are some things that you're optimistic where you see these things now changing?
I think a lot of it is still dealing with tradition and also with the marketing of the products that have been every year, you know, and some of it's just the as I said, the tradition, dad did it, grandpa did it, mom did it, whoever did it. And so I continue to do it. And there's also the misconception that, if I leave all that grass clipping down, it's going to contribute to the thatch problem, and I'm going to have problems with my lawn in that regard, or that I always have to put down, crabgrass killer in the spring of the year. Those are the sorts of things that I see continuing. But more importantly, what bothers me even more so are the landscape companies that individuals are hiring. They are selling them, this season-long program that it's the 3-step, 4-step sort of program where they come in and they are putting down fertilizer and crabgrass killer early on, followed by soon thereafter in the spring with a broadleaf weed killer and maybe some more fertilizer at that time. And then a little later on, probably in July, they're coming back in and now they're putting down an insecticide to potentially take out chinch bugs, or put down a preventative product to take out lawn grubs, and then back in there again in the fall of the year to give them another fertilizer and maybe another broadleaf weed type control. What I don't ever see happening with those companies is after they take those weeds out, they're left a 6-inch or an 8-inch bare spot where that dandelion died. And unless I get something else to grow back in there, get some other grass to start growing in there, all I'm going to do is get more weeds again. So why aren't they coming in there and putting on an overseeding of some grass seed to take in and fill in those bare spots? And that's the same way as homeowners could easily, in these thin or bare spots, rake them up with a steel rake, disturb the soil, and toss on some grass seed and get those areas to fill back in with grass. The thing is a weedy lawn, a thick weedy lawn is better than a grass lawn that is thin, because now I got water running right through that grass and taking with it the soil and the nutrients to the lake, whereas all those weeds slowed that water down, held it in place. So just because you got weeds doesn't mean that it's bad for the environment. Even for dandelions, my goodness sakes, folks, yes, it's a introduced weed from Europe, but at the same time, it is one of the first pollen plants for many of our pollinators, such as honeybees and others, as well as for all of our ladybugs as well. So not only that, but kids love to go out and pick a handful for mom,
Jen, you're still on mute.
Thank you. That's why we have co-hosts. I think we're coming to the end of our hour, and we've had a nice variety, I think, of both the presentations, what both of our speakers had to say, as well as a little mix of questions. And it seems like people got their questions out, so we appreciate that. If you haven't been following the chat box, a couple of things. As I said, tomorrow, if you want to dive deep on lawn care specifically, I would recommend that you tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. Frank Rossi has been asked by the Canandaigua Lake Association to speak. I will drop that into the chat box one more time if you want to grab that URL or the Zoom number for that meeting tomorrow. And I think I forgot to say earlier that the last in this series of webinars that we're doing right now is going to be in 2 weeks on May 27th, and what's in your trash. So we're going to take a little turn. We're not going to be talking so much about growing things, but thinking more about waste reduction, another way to keep our lake healthy, ways that we can avoid ever buying a product or reusing it or recycling it before it ever gets to the trash. So Jacob's going to be our main speaker on that, and so that's on May 27th. Before we say goodnight, does anybody want to say anything for the good of the order?
Jennifer, just to follow up on the webinar tomorrow with Frank Rossi, I suspect this is a repeat of the presentation that he did for the Canandaigua Lake Association back earlier in the year. It is an excellent presentation, folks. He dives into it, and basically I gave you the sort of the quick and fast and furious. He goes into a little more detail than what I did. So if you're at all interested, I would definitely encourage you to attend it if all possible. One other thing I'd like to say about lawn, and that is some of you may have heard or have used corn gluten as a way of trying to kill germinating weed seeds. Research has been yes and no on this, in that oftentimes they say it's because of the nitrogen within the corn gluten providing nutrients to the grass, and that it's thickening up. That's what's taking out some of these weeds. Others of it is that if the timing is proper and the seeds are just starting to germinate when you make the application of the corn gluten, that it has a sort of a weak acid and kills the seed. But for the most part, it's the nitrogen fertilizer that's thickening up the lawn and taking out some of the weeds. So if you were wondering about corn gluten, there's the ins and outs from Russell on it.
And that's a product you want to be really careful about using near the lake also, because that nitrogen running into the lake or into a stream can be problematic.
It is a powdery sort of a product, so it's not the nicest to put on. I guess you can get it as a granule as well. It's not cheap either, so.
All right, well.
May I say one last
Please.
Now, people think I hate lawns. My nickname since 2006 has been No Lawn Sean. But I do really enjoy a little bit of lawn. It's nice to go barefoot, all that sort of stuff. But my invitation for anyone still here is just, that I think that we're all gardeners. Even if you just go out there with your lawnmower, you are gardening, in a way. It's just a specific form of gardening. And what I've found with, everyone I've seen kind of reduce lawn and create gardens is that their need to fertilize goes down. They end up saving money long term, and it's a prettier environment, So even if you're just planting a fruit tree, you can think, in kind of an ecological perspective, where you're planting an ecosystem that supports your fruit tree or supports your redbud tree. And there's lots of little things. So if anyone ever needs help, you're thinking about how to just bring even just a plant or a shrub into their property, I'm always, up for that puzzle of figuring out what's the right plant. And, we could spend more time, not mowing on the weekend, maybe.
Sean, there's a lot of interest right now with Pollinator Garden. So you ought to be fairly busy just giving out advice on Pollinator Gardens.
It's, and you can call it a cottage garden, you could call it, a Victorian garden. It's just, all these gardens feed the pollinators, which is great. I think the world will be a much healthier place when we just get some more pollinator feeding landscapes out there. Kids love them. They're going to demand them soon, I think.
Well, this is great. I thank everybody for their comments and their interest to be here tonight. We didn't promote, we do at the Town of Geneva have an email address too that you can go to if you have any kind of ecologically oriented questions that we will try to answer. And if we can't answer it, we'll do the research and maybe have future speakers on it or something like that. And thank you again. And we hope you'll be back in 2 weeks to talk trash with us. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye-bye.